Welcome, everybody. My name is Paul Smyers. I am a country real estate agent in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. And I'm going to talk to everybody about zoning today because zoning is extremely critical when you purchase your property. A lot of people don't realize what the definition of ownership is, and a lot of people seem to have this misconception of, hey, I bought my property, I paid for my land or whatever, now I can do whatever I want with it, I own it. Well, it's not exactly quite like that because of what they call zoning rules. And there are a lot of key elements in it, and I'll get into some of them as we talk here. First of all, zoning is all over the place across the country. Typically in a rural area, the zoning evolves around the type of people that were living there, our ancestors 20, 30, 50, 60, 100 years ago. And little by little, as people settled in this country, over the many years, they had certain rules about land ownership, which technically speaking is debatable about who owns land or whatever, but a lot of people imagine they own land. So the reality when you buy a piece of property, the real estate laws, just because of the regulations around the countries or whatever, and in the states and the counties, they have different sort of approved uses of land. And so what you buy when you get your deed, you don't really buy land in the sense you pick up a suitcase and walk away with it. It's not that kind of possession. Technically speaking, what you buy in the real estate industry is a bundle of rights. It's defined in a contract, you might say a deed, which is kept over sometimes it's 200 or 300 years of a deed passing this certain kind of property. And over the years, sometimes even a zoning change may be made. And for example, I'll give you one example I heard about some years ago. There was a local town, a small town, that had approved a whole lot of 1 acre zoning. And what that meant was that some builder could come in there and punch in a whole bunch of houses, all 100 houses on a 100 acre piece of land. But what had happened, and I wasn't there at the time, but long before that, a farmer had bought all the 1 acre zoning because he didn't want it to be used in that way. He wanted to use it for a farm. So he said, I'll take all that 1 acre zoning. Now, what that meant was for the town was all of a sudden there aren't very many 1 acre lots available in town. So then it caused some interesting complications. Now, typically speaking, in the rural area, because most of this country was settled in agriculture, we had to produce our food. People lived on the land, not necessarily totally self-sufficient. It's very hard these days to build a homestead where you're totally self-sufficient, completely off the grid. You don't depend on anybody for food. That's almost impossible now. It's theoretically possible, but it's very difficult. But over the years, the communities that have developed around rural areas, and generally where the sparsely populated areas, a lot of people had their home industry in their business, their little farm. Even if it wasn't a big farm, they had some kind of production going on. And maybe they had a few cattle or some horses or something. So the land was protected by the zoning laws that in some rural areas, I even saw 20 acre zoning. That the land is so good for farmers, they don't want people to cut it up into little pieces, you see. So that means that when you buy a piece of property, you don't really have this unlimited right to do whatever you want there at any time and whatever, because there are certain things in the contract of the zoning. And sometimes over the period that you own a house for a long time, that zoning can actually change. And sometimes that can be very embarrassing. For example, let's say you have a home on a nice country road for a long time and your family's owned it for a long time. Maybe it's even a farm. But little by little, there's an example of that right around my area, where little by little over the years, they slightly broaden the road. They take a little bit more of the farm on each side. And there's still the farms on each side of the property, but some of them got divided. You see, the road goes through. And in some cases, there's little houses that were once upon a time 100 feet from the road. Now the road is like 10 feet from their driveway or whatever, the 15 feet from their front door or something like that. So zoning can change over the time if it's a long time problem or situation where you own a property for a long time. Let's say a family, like I said, a farm could be divided in two or something because of some road or something. So getting back to the whole subject, if you're going to homestead in any part of this country, and I mean by going to live in a rural area where you have a couple acres, when you don't have, we have the liberal use of your land. That's basically what rural land is all about. And I get customers and people calling me and they email me and they want to live off the land or they want to do homesteading. And so I address that because it's a wonderful way of lifestyle out in the countryside, but there's different aspects of it, and one of them is zoning. And if you can find a deed that has a clear title and clear what they call a full warranty deed, and basically you own everything, and you own the bundle of rights. You don't technically have a suitcase full of property that you buy. It's not like that. But if you buy the bundle of rights in an area where it has a long history of agriculture and the local zoning and laws favor and actually encourage it and reduce your taxes even, because they want people to grow food, and that will bring us to another part of the economy, which I'll talk about in one of my other videos. But food production has long been a very important staple of every culture in the world, but certainly here in the United States. And Virginia in particular, and some of those states, the early states of this country, Virginia was at that time one of the more southern states. And up in the north, in New York and Maine and all those states, well, they didn't really have very good agriculture because, I mean, they had some, but they didn't have the longer growing season and more usable land like we have here in Virginia. So Virginia happens to have a lot of very open zoning. And if you respect it and don't do anything crazy there on your property, you might even be able to have a campsite. Nobody's going to ever bother you. If you want to have a campsite with 20 people and all summer long people are coming in and out or whatever, then now we're talking a little bit different kind of a situation. But generally speaking, in agricultural areas of the United States, you'll find a lot of land that's in open zoning. We have a number of different kinds here in Virginia. One is just general agricultural land. They don't really have any limits on it. Basically, it's just kind of grandfathered in, and typically it's farmland. Or maybe just forest land that hasn't really found any really particular use, just a lot of forest. So they don't really give it an acreage zoning per residence. Excuse me, because not very many people live there. Now, when you get into more rural areas, excuse me, more habitable type of land, now you start talking about 1 acre, 2 acre zoning. We have agriculture 1 acre, we have agricultural 2 acre, we have some 5 acre zoning. So in Virginia, we have a variety of different kinds of zoning. I've even seen 20-acre zoning for farmers because they want to protect the beautiful pasture land and they don't want to have a lot of different buildings there and so on. So you'll also find commercial zoning, that sometimes there's a residential zoning right next to commercial zoning. Technically speaking, in the countryside, most of the zoning almost anticipates that the farmers, the local people, are going to have some kind of business on their property. Because a farm or farm stand, whether you sell eggs or firewood or something, is some kind of a commerce going on. And a lot of the people who live in the country are your contractors, your builders, your electricians, plumbers, chimney sweeps, carpenters, welders, because they need big gear. And they have to park it somewhere on their property. And also you'll find people who own backhoes, bulldozers. Of course, the farmers have all kinds of tractors and so on. So you'll find that people want to have some kind of occupation that's associated with their land. Not necessarily that they feed themselves entirely and so on. That's not how it works out in the countryside. It's more of a, you have something I need, I buy from you, we share in a need, whatever. We help each other out, but we all know that we're all trying to make a living here. And we have to have rules on our land that allow us to do that. So that's where you're going to find the beautiful zoning that I call the open agriculture zoning. Now, again, it's very specific, and your particular deed might have something on it that says particularly, I ran across a deed one time that says, is more like a minimum zoning was 5 acres or 4 acres per lot, per household, and they couldn't have any pigs or roosters. So there's certain things like that that you might find in a deed or whatever, a covenant, but try to buy not in any kind of development. There are private developments where someone left some land and they said, okay, these 20 acres, I've got to chop them up in 5 parcels, or 100 acres and 10 parcels or something, and they kind of wheel it down or whatever to the heirs. But at the same time, there's also property that gets fixed in the zoning and it doesn't really change much, but you want to find a zoning that's out in the area where it's not going to be suddenly changed when you're living there. See what I mean? Because if you're living right next to an area where it just so happens you're on the border of a town and the zoning changed right next to you, and next thing you know there's a 7-Eleven or something like that, or a dollar store, and then you have this little house on the main road, and all of a sudden everything's changed. So you got to think about some of that when you buy land. Now, zoning is very important. I don't want to overdo it here, but please, if you're going to be living in the country and you want those chickens and everything, then make sure you have the right zoning for it. If you want to put a camper there, have a farm stand, any of that stuff. Now, the good news, like I said, Virginia has a lot of that kind of land, and many parts of the country do, especially in the eastern states, or any of the agricultural states tend to have some pretty open zoning. And then, of course, if you get way out west, they say, oh, yeah, it's all open zoning, but good luck living there because it's hardly any rain or something. So it's the zoning may reflect kind of the climate. Say, well, if you really want to live there, yeah, go to it, buddy. But, good luck up there in the mountain. But more practically speaking, zoning is a regulation that's designed basically what they call the best use of the land, the best use. So the best use, if land is fertile and ready for a whole bunch of cows or whatever, a beautiful crop every single year, that's the best use of the land. It's not, the best use is not to have a bunch of houses on 1 acre zoning. So I really, really am passionate about the rural life because it's a homestead type of life that founded this country. It's the basis of most countries in the world where food production is happening. People live there. They produce food. God bless them, honestly, because, frankly, it's very difficult to live on a farm all the time. You got to take care of animals and everything. Every single day, there's multiple things that can come up, so on. So my congratulations to anybody who wants to live in a rural area and maintain the property. I'll talk about that in some of my other videos. But once you buy a property, please take care of it so that you can enjoy it fully and keep the value of it, and then you can pass it down to any heirs or future people. So I want to make this video short, but thanks again for listening, and I hope to see you in some other content. Again, zoning is very important, and it's just something that you need to be aware of when you buy property, especially if you want to do various things on your property, like just about anything that the homesteaders like to do, rain collection. Typically, rain collection is, we'll get into that another discussion, but rain collection generally, if it's a small scale thing, you need it, nobody's going to bother you. So thanks again for listening, and I'll hope to see you in some of my other videos.